Right in with guest speaker.
Yeah, I mean, I have no clear ideas about anything, and I mean, I kind of just told you that, you know, you didn't need to come with the presentation or anything, that it's just a tiny group, so. But that if we had questions or whatever, but I don't know if you have a
Yeah,
rehearsed spiel yet.
a little bit. Yeah, I can talk to you all for like a few minutes. I wrote some stuff out and then take any questions you have. If I can't answer them right now, I'll write them down and follow up. To begin, I'm going to give each of you a print copy of our solar sighting guide. It sounds like a lot of you have looked at this online maybe before. But yeah, if you want one of these, go right ahead. It sounds like, yeah, you print them out.
Is that what you, I'm sorry, is that what you put online? Because I did read that.
I think this is the one that I sent that 2 weeks ago.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great, so yeah, that is a guide that we released last year, balancing solar development and farmland protection. Since I came on staff at MFT, it's been a lot of the work that I've been doing, mostly promoting the guide. And in addition to that, we're also working on a more full-length municipal policy and planning guide called Cultivating Maine's Agricultural Future. The second edition of that is going to be released hopefully in the next couple of months, and I'll be sure to get each of you a copy when that does happen. And then sort of the third part of my job is now transitioning to a more technical assistance role. So doing exactly what we're doing here, coming to committees, talking with people, trying to promote this stuff, and yeah, maybe get some of these farm-friendly ordinances enacted. So we're talking about solar today. I kind of wanted to read Maine Farmland Trust's like stance on solar. MFT believes that solar energy generation and agriculture can coexist in Maine in a mutually beneficial manner, as long as solar development is sited in ways that minimize impact to agricultural resources. So I'm sure a lot of you have thought about the complexities that come along with solar siting on agricultural resources. Solar can help farms financially in some ways by supplementing their farm income through valuable lease payments. But on the other hand, there's also concerns from farmers about losing access to farmland in Maine. It's a diminishing resource, and if it's all taken up through solar arrays, that could pose a problem. So yeah, like I said, it is being proposed on soils all across the state. Land classified by the Natural Resource Conservation Service as prime farmland soils or soils of statewide importance are the most conducive to farming, and they only make up 14% of the soils in our state. So in the guide, we have some general solar siting guidelines. I won't read all of them right now, but I'm just going to go through the first three. Our first is to avoid land identified by the Natural Resource Conservation Service as prime farmland or farmland of statewide importance. Second is to preferentially use previously developed, disturbed, degraded, or marginally productive portions of a farm property. And the third is to encourage dual use wherever possible. So I know dual use is something that you all have been talking a little bit about here, weighing maybe a requirement versus an incentive. Andy sort of filled me in that regard a little bit. So I've looked through a lot of these solar ordinances in Maine and beyond in New England. And there are no Maine municipalities that I'm aware of that outright require dual use in any way. That doesn't mean they don't exist. I've looked at a lot of them, but I haven't looked at all of them. If you do find one, definitely let me know because I'd be really interested in that. And in addition to that, I wasn't able to find any like true incentives, whether it be financial or otherwise. What I have come across in my research is several instances of solar ordinances that have language encouraging dual use, perhaps as a vegetation management method, but again, no requirement. I think the ordinance that you all are working to amend right now had some language around encouraging it. Yeah. So how we sort of think about dual use right now is that there's a lot of studies going on in the United States and in Maine that are looking at the viability of these projects. There's an example right here in Maine in Rockport. I don't know if any of you are familiar, but companies Blue Wave Solar and Navisun LLC. They created a solar installation over 12 acres of wild blueberry fields. And the project's being studied in collaboration with a farmer, landowner, solar developers, and the University of Maine. And they're looking to answer some questions like how, or what are the impacts to crop production of having solar arrays over blueberry fields? And what are the costs and management changes that are needed to have a successful commercial blueberry production under solar arrays? So on this note, hopefully best practices, like industry standards will be developed in the coming years around this. But right now, I don't have anything specific to point to. Town provisions that I've found that do encourage dual use include Barre, Massachusetts. In their purpose statement, it reads a proposed site. If it's presently in agricultural use, the continued agricultural use shall be encouraged. Auburn, Maine has an operations and maintenance plan. And this requires that applicants submit a plan that prioritizes the ability to commingle agricultural and energy generation land uses. And the examples they give are apiaries, grazing, or hand-picked crops. In Auburn, this provision is intended for solar developers to incorporate a commitment to working with farmers in some way, but it doesn't include any specific parameters or require applicants to consider dual use in the design of the project.
No incentives either.
Nothing, not what I would describe as like a true incentive, no. During our research, we talked to farmers as well as city planners, and it sounds like during one tour of a solar project in Auburn's ag zone, a farmer expressed concerns about grazing their sheep there because of the site and how low the panels were, and concerns that the sheep could cause damage. So, in addition to finding the right developer that's interested in dual use, that can be another challenge, is also finding a farmer that is willing to do that collaboration and having all of those needs met. Like what I imagine you all are thinking, city planners in Auburn are also really interested in these industry standards around panel height and other specifics that can factor into dual use, and how maybe they can adopt some best practices into their ordinance and revisit it later to make a more firm either incentive or potentially a requirement. Belfast, Maine has a provision in their vegetation management methods. It includes grazing of farm animals as a suggested method for vegetation management, and that's just for proposed large-scale solar energy systems. Before this meeting, I gave the city of Belfast a call to ask them, have they had any interest from developers? What have they seen, like having this encouraging language? And it sounds like they've had 4 projects approved since the ordinance was enacted, and only one developer has expressed interest in implementing grazing as a vegetation management method. And by that, they were receptive to the idea, but the project hasn't moved forward because of the state approval backlog. So that's something to watch, but it sounds like it would still be a while until they need to decide whether they're going to actually integrate that dual use component. And from Belfast, generally developers seem hesitant. Again, mostly the read from the city was because not many people or no one has done it before. Best practices need to be developed, and there's a fear of being the first. There's 3 more things that I just wanted to touch on when it relates to dual use. There were 2 other towns that I found with language. Mount Vernon, their ordinance reads that efforts will be made to minimize the impact of existing agricultural uses by developing dual use solar projects when possible. I tried to give them a call to see if they've had any interest, but I didn't hear back. I'll let you know if I do. And in Bodenham, they have slightly unique one. Their ordinance reads that if the project is to be located over land in the comprehensive plan that's identified as prime agricultural soil, farmland of statewide importance, or farmland soils of local importance, the plan shall minimize soil disturbance in the installation of the solar energy system with the goal of preserving future agricultural uses, and shall include habitat for native plants and pollinators, or incorporate a dual use agricultural operation. So they have that either or. You can choose habitat for native plants and pollinators or a dual use. I also called Bodenham and they had no interest to report so far in using that dual use over the habitat. It sounds like they haven't gotten a lot. The ordinance hasn't really been triggered much at all in that town yet.
So
Yeah.
that actually is a requirement, though. They're saying that it must either be
Yeah, my
habitat or ag.
Yeah, my read on it is that, yeah, they shall include either habitat for native plants and pollinators or incorporate a dual use agricultural operation. And yeah, I can definitely get you a copy of that language after this. And there's one other update related to dual use that I want to share with you at the state level. So we will be supporting legislation this year that's designed to establish a pilot project to study and create uniform standards for solar developments that's compatible with agriculture in Maine. So that dual use projects can be expanded throughout the state. This legislation would also create a statewide public database that has key characteristics of fully permitted and constructed energy projects in Maine. So that can be used as like a land use resource and something that's open to the public and people can look at. So yeah, I think we're involved with that for this session. I don't work on state policy myself, but I think that's definitely something that you all could keep on the radar as it relates to dual use, because if everything goes to plan, maybe some of these best practices, industry standards will be developed, maybe not too far into the future. So those are the notes I had on dual use. I also have some stuff I can share about mitigation fees, but if there's any questions right now about dual use, integrating agriculture, solar development, I'm happy to, again, either field them or write them down and return with my answer over email.
Okay, two things that I'm wondering why. I guess it'd be cost prohibitive, maybe. Is spreading out the arrays so you can utilize dual use, so you'd be covering a larger piece of land. The other one was, why can't these units be elevated? Simple as that. Get them off the ground. That cost prohibitive or?
I would say that that's what I've heard so far, is that there's concerns, A, about the cost, and then also B, about, just it being such a sort of a new method, and there's just kind of a fear of being the first almost. But I do think that, I've heard people say that the increased cost associated with developing a dual use can maybe deter developers at times.
I think they told us the other night, we're reviewing a project currently. And I think they said if they're higher, they would have to have lifts or something to.
That's what they told us when we did the tour of the
the
site on the
tour, yeah,
ridge.
yeah.
They were saying that just the installation, it's not even just this, because I challenged them on this. And they, they said it wasn't even the cost of the steel or aluminum, I guess. It's the fact that it's also in the installation, they would have to have man lifts then to install all the panels. Which they claim would also be cost prohibitive. And if you have to do maintenance, everything is just elevated. I mean, I hear what they're saying. I guess I'm a little skeptical when I see the dollars that seem to be rolling around in this industry. But that's one of the things they said.
In those two. Doesn't look like they're elevated there.
No, so that there, I would say, referring to the crescent run.
Right,
Yeah, that's a pretty standard array. And
And the blueberry field. I don't know what it, but I mean.
To my knowledge, neither of those operations were, obviously the blueberry one's a little different because they're studying it, but I don't think that they altered the panels, if at all, or in any significant way, in those two instances.
I thought on the blueberry instance, they actually did there's like a 5-acre study site or something like that. And then there's a standard 30-acre array adjacent to it. And I thought that they were raising the panels and spacing them farther apart in that particular case. But I think so the definition of what is dual use too can be very tricky because it's dual use just grazing livestock under a traditional array, or is it incorporating bees or something like that? That to me seems pretty weak. Or is it saying, you have to actually adjust the array in a substantial manner so that you're planting crops underneath, you're reducing the amount of light, like the state of Massachusetts. They have regulations on actually like how much light is actually reaching the ground in these dual use projects that they're requiring on ag land. So it's all like different types of dual use. or what you call dual use. When I was working in a group at the state level, you know, we had like co-location and dual use is like different things. So like we called just grazing livestock in a traditional array, like the Ridge project or what's been proposed on the South Monmouth Road. That would have been co-location. That wasn't like dual use, which would be raising the panels up, spacing them out farther, doing all these other things that really allow a lot more uses of the site besides just basically grazing sheep, which is pretty much the only thing, or maybe goats, but definitely sheep. Yeah, I mean, I really, so, I mean, just to say from Monmouth's point of like, so we have one project and another one under review, and the developer, there's a lot of lip service to grazing, you know, oh, we're interested, but nobody's doing it. And it just kind of seems like it's one of those things that, oh, we say this when we're under review, and then it's, I don't know, it is being done. It's being done in the state of Maine on hundreds of acres. It's being done on tens of thousands of acres across the country. I mean, they're not really being the first.
Yeah.
It's just, you know,
Okay. First, I believe Dirigo means I lead, so forget that. The other thing that I heard was that in town after town, city, Auburn, Massachusetts, the idea of, particularly on agricultural land, and the South Monmouth Road, they hate it. That's agriculture. That it sounds like everyone is discussing this. This is not some wacky idea. This is something that people are looking at and saying, if we're going to do this, we are going to make it so that the land in some way remains agricultural, because that is a value. This is not a one-off. It's happening in all of the things that you, and I'm sorry I missed your name, but in all of those examples, it was dual use, dual use, dual use. Mount Vernon, I would be interested in, simply because Mount Vernon is similar a little bit to Monmouth, in the same way that Reed Field, when you sent the ordinance, Andy, from Reed Field, that also, I think, you know, is a town that's similar to Monmouth, that I would, and I was very interested in rereading it, looking at it closer. I didn't look at Auburn's, assuming that it's a city and it wouldn't relate, but it sounds as though they too are looking at where these are being cited and what the previous use of the land was. So I think even if the state has not made any specific rules, this is not something that's going to go away. And so I think it absolutely should be included in the revision of our ordinance.
Certainly. I also want to make it clear that like Maine Farmland Trust supports and encourages dual use. I was just speaking from the perspective of being able to show you guys some sample ordinance language, or, you know, show you a resource that can sort of give you, you know, specific panel height and things like that. So that's sort of the lens that I was looking through when I was looking through ordinances, is trying to find resources for you all that you might be able to take from or look through.
So a lot of times it looks like what happens is these developers come in to the landowner and initially get kind of an option on a big piece of property. Then they do their studies and they end up like leasing a much smaller piece. And by the time they come to the town, they pretty much have that area. You know, the initial parcel, say, might be 30 acres, but they're going to use 10. And then you almost have to have the landowner be willing to do something with that remaining, say, 20 acres. You know, whether the developer could go back and say, oh, they want us to spread out these units. You know, then they have to renegotiate their agreement with the landowner. And where that goes, is it gonna go? I suppose there's incentives both ways to do it, but the company is then somewhat over the barrel because they've committed effort and money. And now the landowner can say, well, if you want more land, yeah, but you gotta pay us more. I don't know if that's gonna interfere with getting agricultural uses sort of done. I mean, it's like that piece, a lot of the one on the Ridge Road, they're still growing corn up there. You think, Andy, it looked like they were.
Yeah, other, I don't know if it's one parcel or how many parcels that,
Yeah,
Rick Dyer, Clemedo Farm, owns up there. Right, yeah, I mean, and that's one of the arguments against, just more broadly against dual use and where you are spreading out panel density is that, yeah, well, then you just end up taking up more acreage for the same power generation. So
Yeah.
you can definitely make that critique, but I don't think that, if we're talking, if we're considering dual use, or we just want to encourage bare minimum of, I mean, I felt like Bodenham's, that example of saying, okay, either you have to do some sort of habitat, effort for creating or restoring habitat on the site, or you need to incorporate agriculture into the site somehow. I thought that was intriguing anyway. I just think it's really telling when you look at Belfast, they've had 4 projects approved and they have a very similar, we encourage this thing to happen, but if it's not a requirement, are there no penalties? There's just, nobody's gonna do it basically, because
and how do you
the
enforce
path
it?
of least resistance is to just set up a bunch of people with mowers and string trimmers and away you go. I mean, that's what we do really well.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and it's,
so,
I mean, you have an enforcement issue, like if you say, okay, yeah, you bring in the sheep twice a year, who's gonna enforce that? Suppose you could say, well, you gotta report to us who brought the sheep in, and when it was, they'll give us their contact information, but then you gotta have someone who's gonna reach out and say, did this really happen?
yeah.
And then what is the penalty if they don't do it? So they're kind of, especially in small towns, there's sort of a practical problem of follow-up.
So,
It would be, one idea I thought about, but I don't know how practical it is if you're taking prime agricultural soil, you pay some type of mitigation fee, which goes to Maine Farmland Trust or someone to create a soil bank, for lack of a better word, or an inventory of land that would then be available to new farmers, existing farmers.
Yeah.
But I mean, how much money are you gonna generate? How much can you charge a project?
I do have some additional information on like mitigation fee style ordinances if you're interested. Now's a good time if you guys want me to jump back in a little bit. So yeah, in our guide, we feature the town of Topsom, and I think you also all know that they do like a bit of a mitigation fee structure. I know of one other municipality right now that's exploring this method, habitat mitigation fee-like structure. It's a little bit too early for me to discuss the specifics of that, but I will be happy to follow up, hopefully with a copy of that language in the coming weeks, maybe as soon as next week. Andy, I can send that over to you and maybe you can share with the rest of the committee. But a little bit of a deep dive into Topsom's. They use a natural areas plan map that they created in 2010. And that's the basis for the fee structure. They created that map using current use tax records, finding out which parcels are in which current use bracket, and then also just speaking with people in town and tapping into local knowledge. And the map prioritizes different parcels from low to high, low, medium, and medium mitigation fees. Low, medium, and medium parcels trigger a 15% mitigation fee, and that's 15% of the average value per acre of disturbed area or of the facility size, whichever is greater. And then medium to high parcels trigger a mitigation fee that's bumped up to 25%. All the funds are deposited into account that must be used for the purposes of natural resource conservation. Topsom does not do this, but a town could make it even maybe specific to farmland, meaning if a project impacts farmland, the fees are specifically used to in turn preserve farmland in town. I did get an update from Topsum. As of last week, they've had 6 projects approved under this habitat mitigation fee structure. Although only one has been approved and is under construction right now. The town received 1 mitigation fee payment so far of $6,000 through that one project. But assuming that all 5 projects are approved by CMP and constructed, the town is anticipating mitigation fees that total over $1 million. So this could lead to like significant funding for natural resource conservation in their town. But on the other side, that also begs the question, is the mitigation fee serving as a deterrent? If you don't want development on high priority parcels, where should that number be? How high should that mitigation fee be so that you're not having development on those parcels? So that's something to think about. But I thought that number, $1 million, was pretty impressive, and it's a cool structure that they have going on over there.
That's all explained it.
Yeah, that's the natural areas plan map. Yep.
No, I read the Thompson one as well and thought that was very interesting. And how many applications did you say? Did you
No
say
worries. They've had 6 projects approved at the town level, but
Uh-huh.
only one has gone through the CMP process and is actively being constructed right now. The other 5 are in like a waiting period, it sounds like.
Well, then it sounds like mitigation fees haven't stopped anybody. If there are 5 other projects and they're dealing with CMP, which has nothing to do with the town. And so it sounds like the mitigation fees have not stopped anything. I think that's a great idea. If you're gonna tear up land, you ought to pay for it. Sorry, that was a little over the top.
That's okay, Bonnie. I'm on the other side of your mitigation fee balance. I don't go as far as you, okay?
Okay.
I'll also just mention that there is a piece of legislation we're aware of at the state level as well that involves deterring renewable energy development on prime farmland and soil of statewide significance by requiring developers to pay a mitigation fee if it occurs on those lands. And revenue generated through that fee would support farmland protection efforts statewide. Again, I don't work too much on the state level policy stuff, so I don't have much more information about that. But I can certainly follow up, and it might just, be another thing to watch, because sometimes it's not always applicable, but these state level tools can be maybe boiled down or taken from bits and pieces and be effective at the municipal level.
So
As long as it's municipal, has some say or some control. Something.
So if you do something like Topsom does, you got to create research and mapping to kind of identify. I mean, years ago, one of our more detailed comprehensive plans did kind of identify soils throughout the town. I'm assuming that material is still available.
So the soil surveys are all readily available for the whole country. That's very available. Yes, absolutely. I think what Topsom did is really interesting. I think in a town without zoning, this looks way too much like zoning and is also going to take way too much effort. So if we were interested in something similar to this, we just look at it from an agricultural soil standpoint. The maps are already done. It's all public information, widely available. We just say, these are the types of soils that we're concerned about in terms of prime, statewide significance, local importance. And go from there. Because Topsom's also, I believe, is like taking into account, natural areas that are being disturbed. And while I am interested in that, that seems, but yeah, that's a much bigger project, it seems like.
More than we want to deal with.
More than we can realistically deal with in a town like ours.
Is that, well, the solar farm that's being proposed, is that on prime agricultural soil?
That's mostly on Scioto sandy loam, which is a soil statewide significance, though. If we were to do something, I would recommend to include at least prime and soils of statewide significance. Because I mean, prime is. Yeah, they're both very important soils. I mean, MFT. You know, they would even consider some other soils in town, soils of local significance, you know, like our Buxton silt loams are, I know, considered. They're not prime or statewide significant, but they're of local importance because they're very important for hay and pasture land in these towns in the Kennebec Valley in particular.
To my knowledge, you can get a list or a map, not always, but occasionally through soil water conservation districts. They will have the inventory of locally important soils, whereas like NRCS does the statewide and prime agricultural soils.
So. Something else. How does this work? So when you say pay mitigation fee of 15 or 25% of the average value per acre, is that the average value? Who's determining the average value?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. Yeah, I don't know if that's from the assessor's office or
Right.
where they
Which is
get,
a tiny value,
yeah,
or
where they get that number from.
fair market value,
Yeah,
or
that's a good follow-up though. I can reach out to Topsom and see like, yeah, how they calculate that.
because I'm also just curious. I mean, hearing that, you know, there's up the potential for $6,000 or $6,000 have been paid for the project's been approved, but then up to $1 million. I'm like, wow, what, like, how big is that project that's been approved? That's only 6,000, but that there are 5 other projects that are get them the whole way to $1 million. I mean,
I think
that's wild.
there's some large projects
Yeah.
that, yeah, are in the, again, stuck in the approval process, but,
Yeah, so the one that's been approved must be like very
comparatively
tiny.
smaller,
Yeah. I mean, that's like the project on the Fish Hatchery South Monmouth Road. That's how. So novel companies like that, they're going after, if we keep a project under 1 megawatt, then CMP fast tracks our approval. That's why, you know, that project is the 8 or 9 acre size as opposed to the Ridge, which is a more complex approval process and takes a long time with CMP.
I think it's the Ridge.
That one is just under 5 megawatts. You guys would know how many acres.
40,
40.
40 acres.
yep. 40 acres that used to be orchard. Productive orchard, don't get me started.
At last night's obviously watershed meeting. Here, mentioned that, out on 202 opposite where the veterinary hospital is.
Across the road from that.
That's going to be a solar farm.
Yes,
You've heard that.
yeah. And they did a lot of clearing, right? The land has been cleared over there, I think.
Yeah.
That's in Winthrop.
Yes,
It seems like a lot of acreage. I don't know how big it is.
yeah, that looks like a big project.
Hmm.
I know Winthrop is also in the process of a ordinance review.
Mhm.
I don't know any more other than they're also doing
Yes.
this because people are concerned.
No Monica, I know is involved.
Well, there's one other sort of like piece that I put together that I'd love to share with you all, and it's based off one of our pieces of guidance that's about using previously developed, disturbed, degraded, or marginally productive portions of farm properties. So including provisions or requirements about preferentially citing on previously used, disturbed or degraded portions of property is like another great tool that you could potentially look at to use in your ordinance. Auburn has it set up, and again, it's a different community. I realize it's a much bigger community, but they have it set up. So in their agricultural zone, when I believe it's 200, but when X amount of acres are taken up through solar, it triggers I don't know if it's officially a moratorium, but it triggers a stop, and then the Agriculture Commission and the Natural Resource Commission is consulted, and the town comes together and will talk about next steps. They call that the total land area standard in their ordinance. They also have a tool called a prime soils analysis. what this does is it requires developers to show this analysis and demonstrate if the site is proposed on any prime farmland or soils of statewide significance. Might just be prime farmland, but either way, and it says that the least productive agricultural soils must be considered first for development unless they can demonstrate reasonably otherwise. And, you know, having colleagues who've spoken with the people in Auburn, the planners, it sounds like this has been an effective tool in not completely mitigating solar away from prime farmland, but it's been effective in reducing the extent in the sense that it's given the planning board a tool to have a conversation with them and talk about maybe moving it over a little bit to avoid some of these soils. And I think some other towns are thinking about this as well. And yeah, the final like state update I have for you all is that there's another piece of legislation being looked at that introduces measures to promote redevelopment of land with PFAS contamination for renewable energy like solar. There is a lot of research going into PFAS remediation methods right now, and it's ongoing. And I think that some of us think we're on the brink of understanding some potential for successful remediation. So because of that, we support a focus on agricultural land where significant, and that's italicized, very significant PFAS contamination prevents further agricultural production. So this bill would allow farmers to realize that that land that may be restricted for farming could potentially be used for solar development or otherwise. So it's, you know, crafting the ordinance and looking at it a way that you are putting preference on these like previously degraded lands that may or may not already exist in your community, but just another tool to think about.
You got much of anything in wrong with it?
Yeah.
Well, there was some spreading. I think the schedules did some spreading on South Monmouth Road.
Mm-hmm.
And it got stopped because we passed an ordinance, but we weren't thinking, well, we were sort of thinking of similar stuff to PFASs when that was written. The science wasn't quite where it is now,
Yeah.
but there were a lot of people concerned that what was coming out of the sewage districts was not quite what was advertised as, you know, a great fertilizer, but
Yeah.
Yeah,
My
I
understanding.
wanted,
Yeah. Go ahead, Bonnie.
oh, I was just gonna say, other than that, other than the schedule farm, were there any other applications to spread the sludge when it was supposedly the greatest thing that you know of in Monmouth?
I'm trying to remember, you know, that was really back in the early 80s, I think.
80s. Yeah,
Was it the merch farm?
No, the merchants were opposed is my understanding from that's now my farm.
Yeah,
So I know from the guy that we bought it from, John O'Donnell, he said that the merchants were adamantly opposed to sludge. And he actually reached out to us a few months ago to let us know that no sludge had ever been
yeah.
applied there. And we've tested our milk and it came back non-detect, which in this day and age is kind of unusual. So I don't actually, my understanding is the schedule is actually, they wanted a permit, but that no sludge was actually spread because when you go onto the state database, there are no permits in town of Monmouth. The closest would be over in Wales, on the Ridge Road there. Now I'm blanking on the name. Dairy Farm. Tom O'Connell had a permit and he did apply sludge. But that's my understanding of
Yeah.
the closest thing to Monmouth that
We
ever has had.
tried to put an ordinance together pretty quickly just to, because there was nothing.
Recently,
Well, no, this was 30 years
oh
ago.
wow.
So it's just, you know, so we have an ordinance in Monmouth, haven't read it for many years.
Yeah.
but,
Well, I'd say that's a good thing though, that, you know, that's definitely a good thing that there's
Yeah.
no.
Of course, what here we have for land that's not, say, suitable for agriculture, a lot of it's wetland. And, you know, we ran into that at this project we have under review. They ran into wetlands and of course they cited away from the wetlands. Which, you know, now you have land, you can't do much. I don't know what they'll do with the land there that's not in the project, whether they'll continue to mow it.
Are you talking about the solar development project? or-
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so between the South Monmouth Road and where their project begins,
What's,
it's
yeah,
not a lot of land really to do anything efficient. Thing. And it's wet in part.
yeah, I think you'll find that there's a lot of, I mean, I would hate that land. I hate that field. I
Yeah.
hate the whole thing, you know, I mean, I'm sure Bruce Schedule will continue haying that field. He said so at the,
Yeah.
out the door that night.
Yeah,
He told somebody, you know, I'll hay it if it's, you know, I can't remember how many feet by how many feet, you know, I mean, he's,
solid land.
Bruce, he rents land. He either, yeah, yeah. So yeah, but yeah, I was definitely, I mean, yeah, so it is interesting what gets classified as wetland. There's a lot of land that is in agricultural production that today is now classified as wetland. A lot of my land is
Yeah.
has strips through it that is technically wetland, but we're farming it.
you still can graze on it.
We still can graze, we still make hay, you know, it's just, it's wet when it's wet, but you stay out of it when it's wet.
Right.
So I would hope somebody continues to use that as a hayfield. I mean, that's,
How does your what you have here, how does it mesh with, like, well, there's something from University of Maine, agricultural, and then I got all these things. I
From
guess.
Audubon.
Oh, it's from Audubon.
Yeah, it's from Audubon.
How does that all, does it kind of mesh together or?
Yeah, I've definitely don't have the Audubon one committed to memory to the same extent that I do with the ours. You know, I know that we partner with them sometimes. We collaborate with them with both Maine Audubon as well as Maine DACF. So, you know, I think generally, of course, they're focused more on it from a maybe wildlife, natural resources perspective versus we're really focused on those prime agricultural soils, prime land resources. I think, you know, generally they probably do mesh together, but yeah, again, I'm not incredibly familiar with those resources.
One of the
Is
things I,
anybody putting that to, I'm sorry, I'm just wondering, is anybody that you know of currently doing that, putting them together?
So when I read through solar ordinances, I really do read through them with a very agricultural lens. So while I can definitely, you know, speak to ordinances in that way, I am not always looking at it with that more natural resource focused lens. Not saying it's not important, it's just not how I spend a lot of
Mhm.
my time. But I will say that I have read some where I think that I've seen language that's in the Audubon guide and also taken and put in their ordinance. So I think communities do that. They use all these resources and they pick and choose what makes sense for them and then they come together with an ordinance.
seems like they focus a lot on the plants and pollinators. And, because I noticed too, their buffering is not so much, say, as a screening, because they're talking about using different, say, shrubs and herbaceous rather than trees, which, you know, maybe may work, maybe a good thing to mix together. I mean, we're concerned a lot of times with our buffering is to hide that development more than create kind of a buffer for wildlife, birds, whatever. But it's if you can make them mesh, that would be great.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I wonder, I think you would probably have to come up with a much thicker buffer than what a developer might want, you know, where you incorporate perhaps conifers in the back and then you add a lot of these other deciduous shrubs and things that have higher wildlife value than the conifers, you know,
Yeah,
in conjunction, but you know, otherwise you're gonna end up with like up on the ridge where there's next to no screening, so.
Yeah.
Will there be
Yeah.
screening? Will there be screening up there ever?
I don't know, ask the planning board.
well, we're hoping, we told them to do it. I mean, what they reported to me was we lost a lot during the drought this
Right.
early last spring.
Right.
Summer. So I assume they're replanting. We had a code enforcement officer who had a lot of hours. We could send them up there to
Right.
inspect, but yeah, I mean, that's,
I'll inspect.
Yeah, well, all right, we'll deputize you, Bonnie.
Dave's gonna deputize Bonnie.
Is that the only solar array in Monmouth right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes to Bath, Ironwood. It's huge.
Wow.
And I think overall they did a pretty good job, given what limited power we had over them. They listened to a lot of our suggestions. Um,
There's a lot of resistance.
a lot of resistance.
The
Well, we'll
community
see
level.
if they replant.
Yeah,
Well, and that's why, we've discussed last meeting about putting, wanting to see a maintenance plan for example, buffers,
Right.
that they are required to actually make sure that this stuff lives, and if
Yeah.
it doesn't, they have to replant it.
yeah,
Because otherwise otherwise they probably won't.
yeah.
Because they're in Minnesota, what do they care? I mean, the one in South Monmouth Road, Long Road, I can't remember where they're headquartered, but once they're done, point being. Yeah, what's Monmouth gonna do? We don't have a fine or anything, do we, to come back?
Well, you would, I mean, if you violated a condition of approval, then yeah, you could be penalized, but it's an enforcement action. It's
Yeah.
But that language, I think it's important. One, again, that we did discuss the buffers, but do we have, and should we have, I think we should have language in the ordinance that says if they die, you have to replace them. And if that's in the ordinance and they agree to it, then what is the legal, if they've agreed to it, it's in the ordinance.
Well, if it's in their maintenance plan, which they submitted, if it's part of their submission, and we approve their plan with their submissions,
Mhm.
then they have to live up to it.
And if they don't
Well, if they-
replant,
If they don't, then yeah, you try to get them to do it, but if they don't do it, you have to decide, do you want to bring an enforcement action? The town would have to decide,
okay.
do they want to commit resources to enforce it?
When is the practical to have a minimal escrow account for maintenance purposes, basically, sure.
Well, I mean, auditors apparently have told the town manager that those escrow accounts are problematic. And it's probably because they're not being, you have to spend time, make sure what's there, and what you're doing with it. So that there's an administrative burden, I guess.
An annual administrative burden.
Well, because that's, it started when Linda was town manager. She wanted to get rid of all these. Nobody had looked at these. They gave me this list going back 10 years. And there was money in it. And I was saying, gee, that's a project is done and over with. That money should be gone, should have been given back. Or there was some that had a deficit that the town spent more money to get the project through the approval process and it wasn't pointed out to anybody that we needed to collect some more money. So as I said, I think at one point there was a person, when Mary Mead worked in the town office, I think she looked after those and she did a pretty good job. But once she left, I'm not sure her duties were fully assigned, which often happens,
Mhm.
and then you get a turnover in town managers and. So I don't know. I mean, I think you need to have things like escrow accounts for various purposes, but again, there's a certain administrative burden to do that, to have them.
What about the substation, CMP substation?
Well, we still have, there's still money there. And I said, we can't get rid of that money. Because there are some purposes that we said the money's there, but probably Dave Shaw, no, we'd have to go back and look. that why did we, I can't remember off the top of my head even why we. But there's a couple $1,000s. I mean, I have a list of them somewhere. And I don't know if if Jason has done anything to them or they're still sitting there, but. Justin, I'm sorry, Justin, yeah.
We had Jason, too, Jason Simcock.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, that's probably,
yeah.
Could, a question, because I like the idea of doing that. And it kind of makes sense and it's an established practice. Could that be put with, I mean, I assume that we have like a town accountant. Wouldn't it be, or make sense if that's an account and there's money in it, then the person who takes care of the town's accounts, that they do that as well? And maybe, you know, makes a one yearly report. This is what we have in escrow as of this time.
well, the auditor does that.
Yeah.
It's more of an audit function than
Okay,
a,
that sounds
But-
right, yeah.
but they just come in, they don't really take care of managing it. They just come in and say, this is what you got, this looks okay in this area, not in this, you know, they kind of look at the various accounts and, right,
When we change town managers or finance people, we lose so much. I mean, people will like Dave Shaw, but without him running the show, code enforcement, we've lost a lot. I think we've lost the value.
yeah, Dave told us the permits weren't being turned over to the assessor or something, and
It was a whole drawer full of loose permits that were never followed through on or anything, and I don't know, I guess permits money might have been collected, but it was, he's trying to work on that. Fortunately, we have him. As much as some people don't like him, but
That was in the early days, okay?
but I love him.
I'm gonna put this all in the notes and send.
Yeah.
People don't like Dave Shaw,
I don't like.
but I love him.
Voice privacy contents have been updated.
Yes.
Can I have another couple of questions.
Yeah.
Patrick. So Patrick, can you give us, I understand that it sounds like there's a town that's considering another mitigation type fee, but you
Yeah.
couldn't tell us exactly what it was,
Yeah.
because it's not even done yet, but could you give us like any vague, like what it was potentially, or?
Yeah, I can, like I said, I think I can get you a copy as soon as next week,
Okay.
and I can totally, you know, I'll check up on that and I'll make sure I do that. I think if I'm remembering correctly, it might not be based on a map like Topsum's is, but it may be more of a matrix where like the percentage of a project that covers prime agricultural soil, the higher the percentage, the higher the fee, the lower the percentage, the lower the fee, and something like that. So I mean, in that case, it would be maybe a little bit easier for you all to do something like that, where you don't need to go out and do community planning and create a map and all that, but it could be more of like a mathematical equation you just plug in and it gives you the fee.
So, you know, that you got to distinguish between, say, an impact fee and a application fee. Application fees, there has to be a rational basis, you know, administrative cost, say, that you can say this fee is this for this project. Whereas if you create impact fees and you're saying this is having some potential impact on town resources, then you kind of have to do it, I think, that way.
Draw that connection.
And
Yeah.
I think if you say, oh, because you're using prime agricultural soils, you're gonna pay $1,000 instead of 400, that won't stand up in court.
Yeah,
You've got to tie those impact or mitigation fees to, separate from any kind of administrative fee.
yeah.
So you're always gonna, that's my understanding, kind of legal. But it would be interesting to see what, that's why it's good to have you come in, kind of tell us what other places are.
Yeah, and don't quote me on that just because I don't have that
Yeah,
committed to memory, but let me, again, I will certainly follow up and get you all a copy of that.
And then another thing that we were discussing at our last meeting was potentially addressing the density of these developments in a given portion of town. So we talked about how the town has an existing ordinance on communication towers and that, depending on how exactly they're sited, they can't be within a certain number of miles of another communication tower. Did I summarize that roughly? Right.
Yeah.
So, is it possible to say, okay, well, these commercial solar developments, could we, maybe they should only be allowed to be sited one in every mile, they can't be closer than is anybody doing anything like that or?
Yeah, that's interesting. Nothing that I've seen. No, I haven't seen any towns doing anything like that, but that's an interesting proposition. Yeah, I haven't heard that before.
I mean, it's just basically based on the idea that the solar developers are most interested in the land that is closest to the substations. So how do we prevent, all of the land within 2 miles of substation over the next 50 years becoming panels?
Mhm.
Is that a mechanism? And also to spread the impact across a wider area so that I guess I'm saying the exact same thing in a different way, but just so that no one group of farmers or group of homeowners or whomever are solely impacted or, disproportionately impacted by solar development in the town.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea and I haven't heard that one before. But I will keep my eyes out. Yeah, if I see anything like that, I'll let you know.
Can we do something like that?
well, that's an
Yeah, he's the
interesting
lawyer,
question.
don't ask me.
Yeah, I don't, it's, we don't have zoning. And no one has challenged the provision we have in on communication towers. It hasn't come up as an issue, so we don't have that kind of experience to say, oh yeah, this works. But yeah, that's a problem with the South Monmouth Road is, do you say, do you say a half a mile, do you say a mile? Will it get challenged? I mean, it's the landowners who are gonna be firstly upset, probably. To say, well, you're diminishing the value of my land. Well, that would be hard to prove it, because there's other things they could do on that land. We're not restricting it totally.
There are other ordinances that already potentially, diminish the value of their land. I mean, the town already sets a minimum lot size,
Yeah.
that's diminishing the value of their land. I mean, arguably, right? So,
But you could also flip it the other way and the landowner saying, I got the opportunity to get into a lease agreement with this company. You're telling me,
You can't do it.
do it.
Well, you were late. You were too late to the party.
Well, but going back to the tower ordinance, that's a density issue. And if it's not been, it's been around for a long time. I remember
well-
when they first started putting them up. And if it hasn't been challenged, do you know, or could you find out if there have been density issues anywhere else in the US?
Someone could if they wanted to spend the time researching it. I
Well, that's,
suppose.
I'm asking.
Don't know.
are you asking Thatcher to research
Yes.
if there are any density provisions?
I'm looking through these ordinances all day, so I will definitely keep my eyes out for it. But like I said, I haven't seen it set up like that to date. But 7 months into the job, you never know. I could come across something and
Sure.
let you know.
Well, you have provisions usually in your comprehensive plan, that you're trying to, protect the scenic views and the ambience of the community here. Those are always kind of subjective. But yeah, you hate to see one area ending up with 3 or 4, one neighborhood bearing the burden.
I mean, you know, just to also flip it though, I mean, I always say that if the town allows that to happen, it diminishes, you know, I think that landowners could argue it diminishes the value of their properties, the ones who didn't put the panels up, because I don't buy for a second what the representative from the solar developer said at the meeting last week, that, oh, there's no evidence saying that it diminishes property values. I mean,
Well, they could, they probably have funded a study.
yeah, I'm sure that you could piece it together and
Well,
show it.
I'm sure-
But
I'm sure there is an industry group and they have, paid an economist or two to,
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Go-
like
go
the
over it.
tobacco industry.
yeah. there's
Tobacco
always-
industry funded all kinds of studies about the health wonderful benefits of tobacco.
I don't know, I think if you go over, I mean, obviously it's Ridge Road, I mean, all these developments, but I mean, the one that I saw just recently for the first time was over High Street in Gardner. I mean, the abutters to that project, you want to tell me that their property values haven't been diminished at all by that project? I mean, it's, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And they'd have to do some serious buffering.
Yeah. I mean, that project, I mean, I just drove by, but it seems like, man, it goes right up to the boundaries and there's no buffering and there's no, I mean, it's,
So if there was some kind of mitigation fees that were collected, and that money was to be used for, farmland protection, is that something that the farmland trust would be willing to administer, do you think?
Like, what do you mean by administer?
Well, so for instance, we have, there are mitigation fees paid by some developments who can't control phosphorus runoff. And so the developer pays money to DEP, and that money in our area goes to something called the Cobussy Watershed District. And they use that money for, like doing work on camp roads around lakes so that the water isn't going as a straight shot. So you have someone who can kind of use that money for the purpose intended.
Protection of resources.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I mean, it may be the I don't know what Department of Agriculture has for land use protection, or whether they've even got into the weed, the weeds on that like DEP has.
Yeah.
They don't really, I think their regulation isn't on projects, so to speak.
Thompson,
Yeah,
they've got mitigation in place.
yes.
Who's holding the funds and who's calling the shots? And
Yeah, so it is the town that is holding them, and that of course can be a capacity issue. In terms of town staffing, if you have people with time to manage those funds, but yeah, to answer your question, I'm not sure. I don't know if we would do something like that, just being a private nonprofit. Of course, I can check with, my supervisor, talk with people above me, but I
See, if
don't.
enough towns did that, enough towns said, we see a good reason. We know that there is development pressure on agricultural property, and if projects, and maybe not only solar, but other projects as well, had to pay a mitigation fee. And then, as I say, you kind of create you're gonna have land that is gonna be made available in some fashion with, you use those funds to get other land that can be then protected for agricultural use. I don't know. It's kind of not like an easement, but, somewhat.
Yeah, I guess I would be really interested. I mean, so it says in here that the Topsum's Conservation Commission makes recommendations to select board on how the funds that have been collected should be spent. So I guess I'm curious to know how, I mean, are they required to spend those funds on preserving farmland, or
No,
it's just, it just goes into the, I mean, like, so the town of Monmouth, our Conservation Commission, we have a pot of money that is specific to the Conservation Commission that we can spend how we want with select board blessing.
Okay.
Is that kind of how it works there?
it has to be used, and the language that I have right here is for purposes of natural resource conservation, and I think that is specific to land or easements. Yeah, I know it is designed to be used to conserve land in other parts of the town, or natural resources in some way.
Okay, but very broad.
To my
At the end of
knowledge,
the
they
day.
may, I've seen them with a few towns that collect money, where they adopt like through a density transfer fee program or through a habitat mitigation fee program where they would, they develop the program and they haven't really gotten a lot of money from it, haven't gotten enough money from it. It accumulates. And then when they get to the point where they realize that they have enough money to maybe do a project is when they come up with like a spending matrix or a more maybe specific spending policy. So it could be the case that they haven't fully fleshed that out yet, or maybe they have, and I, again, can look into that a little bit more deeply and report back.
I'd be curious to know just
Definitely.
how they look at that. I mean, thinking about Monmouth, so we put the money in the Conservation Commission. We decide how we want it spent. Well, like, what can we spend it on? The town, are we going to start buying easements from? I mean, also, it's just like, at the end of the day, if it's just for solar projects, how much money are we even going to raise?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
right.
I guess it all depends on how that valuation is done, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
Is it real estate? Is it assessor? What is it? I mean.
And it's also, with projects like that, I think a partnership with a land trust is another thing to think about. Because like you said, you might not be able to raise enough money to buy your own easements or purchase, your own town conservation land. But if you have money to approach a land trust or another conservation organization and maybe bring something to the table, it could be a useful tool.
So in that situation, like, if we had this fund, Conservation Commission, and we said it had to be spent on preserving agricultural lands in the town of Monmouth, could we approach, say, NFT and say, hey, we have funds available to help purchase a conservation easement on this property? Is
Yeah.
that sort of thing?
I think, that would be like the Farmland Protection Division of Maine Farmland Trust would be more in charge of that than what I do, but I can't see a reason why they wouldn't be open to a conversation.
Right, yeah, because then it gets out of the staffing issue of, say, the town of Monmouth has to hold the
Yeah.
deed or covenant or whatever it is for conservation easements and.
So last year, one of the interns from Kennebec Land Trust did a little report on solar development in the area of Kennebec Land Trust, because it was a young woman, she called me, and I think she even sent me the final report. But, I mean, I don't know if they looked at that issue. I'll try to find that. I have it somewhere.
Yeah.
But that would be, the land trust might be someone. I mean, they have a couple properties that there's still some agriculture going on. And there's one in Litchfield, I think,
Yeah.
off the Pine Tree Road.
Mhm. So the Conservation Commission met with a representative from Farmland Trust and a representative from Kennebec Land Trust last year or the year before, I don't know, all that's together. And the impression that we got is basically like interest in the properties from the different organizations. Like, if a property has agricultural interest, MFT is a really good fit. If the property is more natural area focused, KLT is the better fit. KLT is not so much interested in agricultural uses. I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah, definitely. We solely, to my knowledge, do permanent agricultural conservation easements where there is that working
Yeah.
land portion of the easement.
I know with other land trusts in other parts of the state too, it gets tricky. I know of farms that have been preserved with smaller local land trusts that have more of a natural resource exclusive focused, and it really hasn't worked well for farms to be, you know, encumbered by easements held by those organizations, because then the boards will start to put all sorts of restrictions on what agricultural uses can happen and all that kind of stuff. So I guess
Yeah. Because I know something, there's one farm in, on the road to Harpswell. On the right, just have to go through Brunswick, and they have hiking trail, the land trust has developed some trails, so they're kind of doing something. They must have done something with them with the land trust to kind of develop these trails and allow people there, and gotten some kind of tax write-off or
you'd hope so.
something to help. Something to help. Well,
I'm an old school teacher. Where are you from?
I grew up in York, Maine, so way down south. Yeah, and now I live in Portland, Maine. And I left for a few years to study in upstate New York. I went to St. Lawrence University and I'm back in Maine. So
I
I've
studied,
studied environmental studies.
environment.
Yeah.
And you're enjoying what you're doing, yeah.
Very much so, yeah. I love working for Maine Farmland Trust. You know, I've been doing this for 7 months and I've learned so much in 7 months that I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to see how much more I learn as I go forward, because I knew about zoning and land use ordinances before this, but it's really been interesting to do like a deep dive and learn about what different Maine communities are experiencing and all that. Yeah,
well, thanks. We appreciate you
yeah.
taking the time to come up.
And I also want to just give each of you a card. Yeah, feel free to reach out anytime. Yeah, I'm doing research and work on topics, outside of just solar development. So if there are other ag-friendly ordinances or tools that you're curious about learning about at the municipal level, definitely reach out to me, and I'd, love to collaborate or be involved in any way that makes sense.
Thatcher, did you include, or would you please include a copy of what you passed out for me?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. And thank you for coming.
No problem. Yeah, can I?
Here's another old teacher.
This has been,
We both taught across the street and the building over there. Lots of gathering.
well, this has been great for me. This has been the first committee that I've sat in on in my new role. So it's been really just
Oh, okay.
awesome to observe the dynamics and get to, hear a bit from all of you. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a safe ride.
Thank you.
Be careful how you use that term, old school.
Old school. Well, I'm old. I don't know about Bonnie. Bonnie's probably still young, but
I'm not.
so at what point do we get into
The ordinance itself? Yeah.
doing that writing stuff?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, and I was just gonna say, I spent a little time going through the ordinance, kind of thinking about this project that we're doing. And there are little tweaks. And they involve things like setback. That the general rules we have for setbacks don't really fit the solar projects. So for instance, we have like a 20 foot, well, I think the side setbacks maybe are 20 feet. And road setbacks are 50, but we say it's the main road. And so for some of these solar projects, I think we need to think about what is an appropriate setback? You know, that's gonna serve some of the community purposes that we want to serve. So there are kind of issues like that, you know, as we go through this is sort of a writing issue. And there may be a couple other things that would occur to you too, Ray, but setbacks was one. There was something else. And certainly, I think looking at, you know, some of the recommendations from Audubon, I think were good too, and we
Mhm.
want to look at those. You know, maybe the next meeting we have, we can kind of look specifically at the ordinance. I mean, I don't know how we. I think I like that language where it said dual use or, you know, use of the pollinators and whatever,
Right.
whatever that language, which is probably in here, like that.
I thought that was intriguing. I
Yeah.
mean, that really, to me, though, gets down to like, who's gonna enforce that? Because as code enforcement officer, you know, is Dave Shaw gonna be able to go to a site and look at it and say, I see native plants growing here, you know, I mean, I can do that, but
Well, you get
that's,
someone-
that's the pretty, you
Yeah.
know, not a normal thing for most people, I think, to be able to decide if that is actually being followed.
Yeah.
Deputy code enforcement, is that in your,
What?
do you see deputy code enforcement being,
Yeah,
Deputy busybody Andy
Yeah.
Smith
yeah,
is going to inspect your solar arrays.
Yeah. So I don't know whether you build in that they have to file some type of certification
Yeah.
that this is what they planted. Once you do it, I mean, a lot of those, it should be self-generating, right? If you use the right.
Well, it depends how it's managed and no, I mean, and that just, yeah, I mean,
I
so
don't know.
I used to back in the day sort of be in that industry, they have plant restoration and
Yeah.
whatnot way back when, and like. Yeah, there's a lot of variables there and you can throw wildflower seeds out there and yeah, maybe they're gonna come up, but it all depends on how, if you're mowing it twice a year, those plants are gonna survive. They're not adapted to that sort of maintenance. And at the end of the day, the cool season non-native grasses that are on a site like South Monmouth Road are going to come to dominate the site.
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's my caution against just,
Yeah,
is it going to have the desired effect? I don't know.
and are there invasive species that are gonna get in there that,
Yeah, I mean, that's
Take
certainly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, you could argue that the cool season non-native grasses that I grow and that are on all the hay fields in town are, you know, I mean, they're sort of an invasive species, so I don't know. Anyway, I think it's interesting though. We're saying, okay, at the bare minimum, you're gonna do something other than have a putting green under these panels.
Yeah.
You know, you gotta do something different. But
yeah,
I guess I would still, on ag land, I would still much rather see the emphasis be on maintaining agricultural use because that's,
yeah.
um,
The, you know, and I guess what I was saying earlier is maybe the bigger projects, you have more kind of flexibility in terms of the size to allow something like that.
yeah,
I mean, it's, you know, it's interesting, like this site on Fish Hatcheries, there is a snowmobile trail, of course, you gotta have snow to be able to use it. And so things like that have a benefit to the town too, whether you have a hiking path or a
Mhm.
snowmobile trail or you're doing some kind of agricultural activity, those all are much better than just having a parking lot or
right. I mean, the snowmobile trail was on the site before. It's not like the snowmobile trail is there because the array was there. The snowmobile trail sounds like it's going to be there despite the array.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
You know, it's not as though they created a park for the town or something on the remaining acreage or, you know, did something. Something that came up at that meeting that I want to ask about was, so when the gentleman from on the Cobussy Watershed
he's the
District.
director, Bill Monagle.
Yeah, so when he was talking about things that he thought needed to happen on that acreage downhill from the site. I mean, are those things that should be addressed in this ordinance? I mean,
Well, it's in,
runoff
it's
concern?
in some of those standards are in the overall ordinance.
Yeah,
So any project undergoes stormwater and phosphorus management review. And so the project has to manage whatever stormwater it creates so that it is treated within its boundaries, so it doesn't leave the site, end up affecting a neighbor or affecting a water body. So I don't think we need to be specific, because I think it's in the general ordinance, and a lot of these projects have to go through DEP review.
so technically, though, the stormwater should be getting dealt with within the site, though,
Yeah.
like the 8 or 9 acres, not on the adjacent land that the landowner owns, but that the solar developer has no right to in their agreement.
Well,
Because that's what he was kind of saying was, well, the field, the 4 or 5 acres that are going to be downhill from the site in question need to be managed X, Y, and Z for the stormwater concerns to be met.
well, that's what I guess we got to clarify that with him.
Yeah.
Because then the developer needs to have some kind of easement at least.
Right. The developer needs to have
Yeah,
control over
Yeah.
what goes on in the rest of that site.
yeah,
And I mean, I'm not saying that I necessarily think that what he was saying is correct or not. I'm just asking, like,
Yeah.
how does that work? And is that something that needs to be in this revised ordinance is what
That's what he does. In the whole district.
Yeah.
He goes around and attends these meetings and that's his major concern, keep the water clear. So Jock Stream down there would be a concern because it goes into Cobs.
yeah, so there might have to be some kind of cross-reference maybe, or whether we put in there that the leased area, the area leased for these projects has to be sufficient to manage stormwater and phosphorus export issues. And so that may mean that a landowner needs to lease more land to the developer. And which probably isn't a problem for a lot of these landowners. But the developers seem to want to try to
Yeah. Yes,
limit what they're paying on a per acre basis.
right. Suddenly, if they're leasing an extra 4
Right.
acres at $1,000 an acre per year,
Yeah,
then that's a lot of money over 25 years.
right.
So,
And I think Bill's, one of his concerns was, or I don't know if it's a concern, he commented that they treat these panels as permeable, so when they're doing a development, you're looking at what are called the impermeable surfaces. And so most of that, according to Bill, is the road that they build coming in. And maybe the area around these inverters. And I think he questioned that, but he said that's the way DEP treats it, so,
yeah, he said, yeah, because as he said, the state wants to see these projects move forward.
yeah, yeah. But I think that's a good point, Andy, that we have to make sure that there is sufficient land to treat whatever stormwater or phosphorus issues. It's not the entire parcel.
Right.
That, if that leased area isn't enough, they have to do. Because Bill may have looked at it, so sometimes we have like subdivisions come in. And they're gonna develop 10 lots, but they leave 30. And so sometimes that 30-acre parcel is being used partially to treat their
I see.
phosphorus allocation. And then the planning board then has to sort of identify that that's happened, so that if someone comes back in, wants to increase the development area, we have to take all of that into account. But I don't think, I think that's an issue we need to look at here to make sure that these projects are properly setting aside enough land to do what they need to do to protect the environment.
At our Cobussy watershed meeting last night, Bill mentioned a development on 135.
Yes. Yeah.
You know about all.
Yeah, they came in, Bill was here. And they want to put in, it's the old Frost Farm.
Yes.
And they're redeveloping the farmhouse. Fixing it up, renovating it.
Yep.
And they want to put in 20 lots. Go down Birchwood, all the way down to Androscoggin Lake, Anabesic Lake. And it is a wet site. There are a lot of challenges. But the owner is from Connecticut. And
Rich lady.
yeah, looks very well heeled. And they've hired a respectable engineering company, so they've got to go to DEP first.
What's their plan? So when the Conservation Commission was talking about this property as a possible project before they got their hands on it, Noni talked about back in the day as a kid, like there being some the lake frontage down there, referring to like as a beach. That
There is a
people
small
would go to.
beach.
It was,
Yeah,
that's where everybody in those days used to go swim.
Yeah.
If they were in that area, Sanborn Road or Chelsea
Yeah.
Road. Yeah, I'm surprised that Piper's getting rid of it or got rid of it or
yeah.
because he always thought that was just the prime Anabesic property.
Yeah. So are they just that's going to be part of one of the houses?
Their initial plan, I think, was to make that area available to all the house lots.
I see.
But there's sort of a restriction in shoreland zoning as to how many properties can access it. So they're gonna have to kind of go back to the drawing board. So their thought is that that there will be stick-built houses on 2 or 3 acres that people will have for vacation homes. But the reality is, I don't think unless there's access, people are going to be interested in a
Right.
house in a development in Maine that you don't have access to water. So there's a subdivision over on, next to Camp Cobussy, and that was one they planned, that has, there's fewer lots there. And those lots some of the lots that aren't on the water have access to this one area. It's where the Thibodeaux live, and who else is down there now?
White Drive.
White Drive, yeah. But there are a lot of wetlands, and I think what somebody said was that beach got created because of ice jams over the years, that it created sort of some kind of wetland. And I think Bill said it even could be drained. There's some technical. But I don't think it's gonna end up as a 20-lot subdivision.
Yeah.
They'll get all done.
Thanks for that update. Yeah, because we're getting off topic a little bit, right? But
A little bit.
I appreciate it because the commission has talked about it. We talked about it at a few meetings. So they'll all like to have an update next week or the week after.
Yeah. So should we meet in 2 weeks? Is that a good plan, or?
For me personally, that would be a good plan because I definitely don't think I can meet next week.
We got a lot to do, don't we?
Yeah,
In a short time.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think we try to. I don't know where the dual use is gonna go,
if you mandate it, it's gonna create a problem.
What Thatcher said? Or what we read from that it was what was the language?
That you have to, I mean, I don't know the exact language, but the requirement from Bodenham where either they have to do some sort of habitat enhancement or engage in dual use for agriculture on the site. Yeah, like that.
Either.
Yeah.
Something. Yeah, the.
Or again, unless you say. I mean, so one of the restraints is sort of the DEP requirements. For, in order to meet their stormwater and phosphorus standards. You can only, like cut, like grass twice a year. And so then the grazing is gonna be limited, kind of a limited, 2 limited periods, I guess. Not that, I mean, of course, you don't leave your cows in one place for, right? I mean, how often do you move your,
Right, and this is
Yeah.
what I was perhaps a little bit too enthusiastically trying to explain to Bill at the meeting last week, but and is clearly though laid out in those best management practices for grazing, solar grazing. I mean, that's all in there. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, so and it goes into great detail about how, managed grazing works, which is radically different than like what Bill and I think a lot of other people think of grazing. Yeah, no, I mean, that is what's being done. Yeah, and there's restrictions on how much residue you're supposed to leave after you move the animals from either the whole site or from, different portions of the site, how long they can be. I mean, I really think there's already a document that lays all this out that could either be included in the ordinance or referenced as a guide for what needs to happen.
There's a worksheet in there that pretty well spells it all out, whether it's a U or what it is and their consumption and that represents X number of days, static area. And it's pretty detailed.
Yeah, it's a grazing management plan. I mean, this is what NRCS extension, that's what they all do. They put together these plans and also in talking to a friend of mine who is doing solar grazing on over 100 acres, different sites. I mean, he was pretty clear. Yeah, I haven't had any issues with DEP. He was the first one that had to deal with DEP, had to explain to them what he was doing, help draft this document with these other agencies. He says he hasn't heard anything from DEP. Everything's fine. It's all been easy going, now that it's gotten straightened out. So I don't know if it's definitely not the issue that it was when Long Road's application was under review.
and is it, I guess one of my concerns is there enough available herds that you can make this a requirement? That you can say either you do dual use or you pay a mitigation fee. Or something.
Yeah.
Or is that just, is it?
That's hard to measure. I mean, there are certainly people out there doing it who would love to do it on this site.
Yeah. And then if you set a mitigate.
Or any number of sites. Sorry, I keep as though we're only talking about the site next to me, but on the Long Road, I mean, the Long Road site is very appealing. I mean, you literally have a landowner there who, in conversations that I had back when I owned sheep and was interested in doing it, which I'm not anymore, but electric power, I mean, the whole works, he was willing to offer up to whoever was going to graze sheep there, and yet the solar developer is not. Because it's only a recommendation, it's not a requirement. At the end of the day, it's just not really a priority for them.
Yeah.
You only have so many hours in the day and they're going to focus on things that are actually generating money for the company.
Yeah.
And working with Farmer John is not generating money for the company. So unless it's a requirement, they're not going to do it. It's the same reason Belfast has 4 projects. Nobody's doing it except the one under review. They might be interested. Funny how that is.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I totally do hear the concern. I mean, it's
Yeah.
totally valid and.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why a mitigation fee, I mean, continuing to encourage it or it's a best management practice, but. If we're gonna do something to try to dissuade from developing agricultural land, putting in a mitigation fee or a penalty or whatever we want to call it. maybe that's a way to go. And then at least we're generating some revenue that can go towards open space preservation in town.
Yeah,
Certainly in line with a lot of the other things that are laid out in the comprehensive plan. Big focus of the Conservation Commission. I mean, we could do the same sort of thing where the Conservation Commission, you know, decides, looks for projects and goes to the select board or I don't know. I mean, I thought that was an interesting model that Thompson has. I'm sure Thompson has the same probably in here. Encourages dual use to happen, but nobody's requiring it. I feel like I'm just going on.
yeah, maybe we can do a little homework between now and,
If it's worthwhile to do it, then they can, when there's serious consideration, they take place. So
What do you mean if it's more worthwhile to do it?
either utilizing grazing or habitat, whatever.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Yeah.
If not, yeah, it's fine. Then it costs.
Yeah, no, I see that, yeah.
Andy, are you aware of any farmland? And I think I asked this in a different way when Thatcher was here. But are we aware of anything going on outside of the state of Maine in other states that is dealing particularly with this issue? And how they're dealing with it?
you mean density?
Well, there's density and then there is the dual use.
Okay,
And the idea of, you know, suggesting something, this would be a good idea. But as you say, Amy, that's not what the solar company's prime motivation is. So, oh yeah, okay, that's a good idea, bye.
Fine,
But
what I just suggested was giving them options
well, yeah, do this or this,
or
or
that.
that, or
Or
that.
pay money, or pay money,
or
you know,
pay money.
do these or pay money. I think that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
give them options.
So what that means is you've got to do something. You cannot
Right.
just say, oh, nice idea, and then go on your way.
Right. But yeah, Bonnie, I mean, the only thing I really know of is it's just at a statewide level, because I don't get paid to read solar ordinances, so that sounds a little fun. I don't know, maybe I should reconsider
Yeah.
careers.
Yeah.
But the state of Massachusetts has a pretty well-developed dual use program at the state level. And it's, I don't know, the impression that I got from like people at Maine Audubon was that it's not Maine Audubon, Massachusetts Audubon, was that it hasn't been super successful because it's so restrictive that a lot of developers aren't actually just, they're just like saying, no, we're just not doing this kind of
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah,
basically. Which I guess maybe that's successful in its own way if they're not developing prime farmland soils, you know, if that was the intent, then, you know, but nobody's doing the style of arrays on a large scale that you're seeing here, which is this is what I'm talking about with like, you know, more advanced dual use, like truly dual use, reducing panel density, all that kind of stuff.
okay.
That, as far as I understand, is not happening on scale anywhere in the United States.
Okay.
That sort of grazing sheep. Yes, happening thousands and thousands of acres across the country and increasing all the time.
Okay.
Just, how do you want to get this?
Can you just leave it? I want to go to the town office because I want to get a hard copy of the current ordinance as well. And can I ask you if I ask them, because I'd be interested. He read the Bodenham one, but it's not in that flyer that he passed out. Is that correct?
I do not believe so.
So if I asked someone in the town office to get the Bodenham ordinance, could they do that for me?
I doubt they would.
I doubt they would. How about Bonnie? How about I just give you Thatcher's email address and you
Okay,
can email Thatcher?
okay,
So,
And it may be, a lot of the towns have like Monmouth have their ordinances online.
I know, but I don't have a printer.
Uh,
That's my problem.
Well, you can just download it to your computer. You don't have to print it.
yeah, I don't know if Thatcher can get you a hard copy, but he can at least send you the digital copy of
Okay.
Yeah,
what
he's
he.
gonna send you a PDF file.
Yeah.
probably.
Okay, but I like something I can write on.
Yeah, I just want to praise you for this, doing this. You do. Very good.
Oh, thank you. Doing what?
I mean, taking notes
Oh.
and then writing up.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing it. Gonna do it again for this?
Yeah, you know, I have to do it, like, I'll probably send it out first thing in the morning, because otherwise I'm not gonna remember any of that stuff in 2 weeks from now.
It's quick, I couldn't believe it.
But I was gonna say, I mean, I took the notes as we talked about stuff tonight. I did my best. Thatcher was a very fast talker.
Yeah,
So hopefully I can understand what the hell I just wrote, but, would it make sense if I mean, I'll type all this stuff, but, you know, going back to like what I did the last meeting where I kind of organized it topic by topic, should I like organize it so that things that maybe seem like they're gonna be the quick, easy changes are at the top and we can talk about them
Yeah.
first, and then we get into the murkier stuff, which
Yeah.
might be more like the density restrictions, dual use requirements, like that sort of stuff at the bottom. I'm just thinking of like kind of laying out a framework for the next meeting.
Sounds,
Does that seem okay?
sounds good.
However you want to produce it.
Yeah. Are you saying you don't want to produce it? I can give you this if you want to type it up.
However you want to do it.
yeah. I mean, I find you do have to do those pretty quick or you lose the
Yeah, I'm not,
thread.
especially when somebody talks as fast as that.
Yeah.
I didn't notice. You were trying to take notes.
That's what I was trying to write, yeah.
It's hard to take notes and participate in a meeting.
Mhm. Okay,
Nice to have a scribe.
yes, thank you,
Happy to,
You're the scribe.
thank you.
yeah. Oh.
All right.
How is
So,
Kate?
You,
Oh, she's fine. There's no baby yet. So
No baby yet? Oh,
that's why I'm here. Otherwise, I'd
Yeah,
probably be on the computer right now. So, yeah. Yep. So 2 weeks from now sounds great to me because theoretically we should have a baby and then life will have settled down slightly and then I can be back. So, do we want to set a meeting date or just
it's
the
2 weeks from tonight.
2 weeks
We're
tonight?
Kind of
okay,
doing it on the off Wednesday of,
Okay.
does that work for you? For anybody?
Yes.
so
Think so.
March 1st,
Today's what, the 15th? That sounds about right. 2
yeah,
weeks
well,
would
I'm
be,
looking at a calendar, it's. 2
yeah,
weeks is
March 1st, 28 days in September, February. Yep, March 1st. Aye.
Bonnie, when do you go into the town office so that I get this?
Yes, I will.
When?
Oh, probably tomorrow.
Well, also, Bonnie, are you gonna come by the farm store anytime soon? Because I could also leave it in there for you if you wanted, whatever's easiest. I don't know if you're actually going to the town office, is what I'm getting at.
Well, I have to go because I want to get a copy of the current ordinance, so I've got to go to the town office. But I'm at your store almost every 3 days.
Well, are you going to the town office?
I wasn't.
Well, when
I would-
when can you drop it off that's convenient for you? Next week?
Probably sometime later in the morning tomorrow.
Okay. All right, I can swing by early afternoon. Thank you.
Welcome.